I don't even know where to begin with Sage. There's just so much to talk about. Because I don't want this video to get too long in length, I'll try to be as quick and concise about it as possible. Sage is a new healer introduced in Endwalker, and is it strong? It feels good and it's fun to play. With the changes done from the Media Tour and launch version, it plays totally different than Scholar, so if you go in with the expectation that it's going to play the same as Scholar, you will be disappointed. While Sage is very fun to play, it does not come without its own range of issues, which I will talk about and give my opinion upon as I actually grew to appreciate some things about it. I want to mention briefly that this video is sponsored by Temperance, a Discord for healing guides and healer optimization discussions. Myself and other top-end healers frequent the server, so if you have any questions or just want to chat, come on by. The Discord also hosts a variety of competitive and social PvE events in Final Fantasy XIV, ranging from hardcore PvE events to clearing Savage and Ultimate turns for different charities. If you enjoy this video and you want to join, I've linked the Discord in the description. I'll see you there. Sage's healing toolkit is ridiculously strong. In fact, it may be too strong. When doing the extreme trials on Sage with my raid group, with both healers doing 0 GCD healing, Sage was consistently higher than the Astrologian in terms of HPS and raw healing. This is mainly due to how potent and adaptable its healing toolkit is. As I mentioned in previous videos, this is mainly due to how strong Kerachole is, and it's still one of Sage's most powerful healing abilities. This ability has a 30-second recast with a cure potency of 500 and also mitigates 10% damage. Because this action only has a 30-second cooldown, this means it's going to be up frequently for most damage in this game. You can use this ability twice per minute, which is an easy 1000 potency worth of healing with 30 seconds of 10% mitigation, and you're really not even stressing using your toolkit to utilize it. Combine this with Physis 2, a 650 potency AoE heal that increases the potency of all your healing actions, Panhaima, an ability with what comes out to generally 800 potency, but it can be up to 1200 potency in value, and an insane heal like Pneuma, which sits around 600 potency, but it can be increased to 900 with Zoe, and you're already set up pretty well without even having to talk about Ixochole, Holos, and Soteria. You also have a very strong single target healing toolkit with the aforementioned abilities acting as single target healing, but also including Haima and Taurochole into the mix. Starting from here, I'm just going to go through the abilities of Sage and give my brief thoughts about them. Let's begin with Eukrasion Diagnosis and Eukrasion Prognosis, as this to me is one of Sage's selling points. Both of these abilities are instant cast due to the augmentation effect from Eukrasia, meaning you can use these both on the move and in emergencies to react quickly. Eukrasion Diagnosis also being instant cast makes using it in dungeons very strong, as you can keep a barrier on the tank at all times, something Scholar can't do because of the cast time on Adloquium. For ultimate fights or even savage fights that include an emphasis on heavy movement when raid damage is spiking, this is going to benefit the Sage a lot. Due to the current Endwalker change to how shields formulate and register, with them now not only applying before the numbers even show up, but also not cascading anymore, meaning they register on everyone at once, this not only makes them user friendly, but also technically makes them better to spam as one heal, as the shield will generally be eaten by the time your next one applies. I want to be clear though that this is really only in situations where the tank or party is taking a ludicrous amount of damage, like trash pulls in dungeons or an enrage AoE spam. Because shields were much clunkier in Shadowbringers in previous expansions, this was not possible, but now it might be an option, we'll have to see. Kardia and Soteria. These two abilities are very strong, not only from a sustained perspective, but also from a recovery tool one as well. If a teammate takes an AoE they weren't supposed to and they need extra healing to get topped up for an incoming AoE, you can actually switch your Kardia target to them and give them a significant amount of healing within a short period of time, especially in combination with Soteria, making each heal 255 potency, meaning you can get a 510 potency heal on a single target in just under 2 seconds, assuming you use a GCD cast followed by an instant cast. Not only is this something only Sage can do, as the fairy isn't exactly the most reliable, but it also feels extremely rewarding to execute. I saw a lot of complaints about how Kardia and Soteria feel pretty weak, but honestly I completely disagree. You're given a tool that you have full control over that's nearly matched in potency to Scholar's Embrace and Fey Union, and it synergizes with Sage's healing kit. This in combination with the fact that it doesn't proc of anything but damage spells, and you're given a very strong action with a deliberate weakness. Moving on to Addersgall. Now we have our system with an underlying problem. Addersgall is one of Sage's core healing systems. You start the fight or instance with 3 stocked, and once you use one it will start regenerating anew, and within 20 seconds you'll have another Addersgall. Once you die, it will also reset to 0 and start charging up immediately. So basically, it's Aetherflow with the Lily Charge system tacked onto it. What's the issue? The potential issue with Addersgall is that it's tied to your MP economy and you are expected to utilize it to maintain a healthy MP pool. Now for the most part, this isn't going to be an issue, as generally you'll be fine for the most part, as you're going to be using Kerachole nearly on cooldown unless you need to hold it for a short period of time for a specific use in an encounter. but for MP intensive fights we can think of this as only being able to hold on to 2 stacks of Addersgall for healing at any given time. This also puts us in a peculiar issue for post-death recovery, as well as we'll have to choose between healing and recovering MP to build up a good enough economy to start DPSing again. Since this ties in with the Addersgall system, I want to bring it up now rather than later, so let's talk about Rhizomata. This ability is honestly probably the worst one in Sage's toolkit. It's near useless as a practical healing tool due to the cooldown of Ixochole, Kerachole, and Taurochole, meaning in most cases it's only going to be able to be used on Taurochole realistically. Because in difficult encounters you are going to be planning out your healing kit ahead of time, this puts Rhizomata's main function as a recovery tool, and as a recovery tool it is still underwhelming because you only get 1 stack. Since Sage suffers the most post-death, with not only its whole toolkit being brought down by weakness or brink, but also having to potentially hold Addersgall for healing, I actually propose that you increase the cooldown of Rhizomata to 2 minutes, but instead have it give you 2 Addersgall instead of 1. This would make it an excellent ability to use for post-death recovery and emergency situations alike, almost akin to Scholar's Dissipation. Moving on to the Addersgall abilities themselves, I'll start with the strongest one, Kerachole. As I mentioned earlier in the video, this ability is insanely strong. It's a 500 potency heal over 15 seconds on a 30-second cooldown that also reduces damage by 10% for 15 seconds. From my experience, this ability should practically be used on cooldown not only for its insane mileage and healing, but also to keep your MP in a healthy range. Kerachole's weakness, however, is that you have to be near the party to use it, and it registers 0.2 seconds slower than Sacred Soil. Ixochole is pretty lackluster, which is okay considering Sage's whole toolkit. While Scholar can make Indomitability a 600 potency heal through the effective recitation using a 1.5 times multiplier, Sage cannot. Ixochole also registers 0.2 seconds slower than Indomitability. Taurochole is insane when it's able to be utilized to its full extent. Due to the fact that its heal is front-loaded, meaning the heal is registered as soon as it's used, it can be pretty difficult to utilize for both mitigation and healing, as it's common for tanks to be near full HP when taking a tank buster. However, because Sage doesn't have an energy drain equivalent tied to its Addersgall system, this doesn't feel nearly as bad, and 15 seconds of mitigation is ridiculous to the point where even if you aren't getting any healing value, you can still accumulate some pretty ridiculous mitigation values. Between rotating Kerachole and Taurochole, you can actually accumulate 45 seconds of straight 10% mitigation on one tank, which is pretty absurd. Moving out of the Addersgall system, let's talk a bit about Physis too. This is a 650 potency heal over 15 seconds while simultaneously increasing healing done by actions by 10% for 10 seconds. The key word here is actions. This means it will affect everything from your heal kit, even including things like Kardia, Panhaima, and Haima, to your co-healer's heal kit, to even the DPS in tanks' toolkits. Because this ability has such a low cooldown of 60 seconds and has some pretty powerful bonus effects, it's almost worth keeping on cooldown at all times unless you need it for a specific healing window. Make no mistake, this is one of your fundamental healing tools in your kit, so make sure you utilize it. Emphasizing further on the conversation on healing actions, let's talk about Krasis to keep everything orderly. Krasis is a 60-second cooldown that will increase the healing potency on all actions by 20% on a single target. Again, this is anything from Kardia to your shielding abilities to even Pneuma, literally everything. I was wrong about this ability. I disrespected this ability so badly during the media tour by saying it was actually one of the worst healing abilities of the 4 new ones, but honestly after playing with it, it's actually one of the strongest. This ability synergizes extremely well with the Sage's healing kit, as all of its healing is free and easy to use, and because this also increases healing from other players, and on top of it being up pretty often, you're always going to get some type of value from this skill. For reference, when using Haima with Krasis alone, it increases its shields from 300 potency per shield to 360 potency per shield, turning it overall from 1800 potency total to 2160 potency. Because Krasis is a 60-second cooldown, it can also synergize very well with Physis, and because healing buffs in this game are multiplicative, this makes them even stronger when used together. While on the topic of Haima, let's take a chance to talk about it. Haima is very strong in dungeons, but in raids it has a very direct issue, similar to its AoE version, Panhaima. Haima needs to be broken 6 times to get the full effect. This means getting the full value outside of multi-hit AoEs or tank busters may be a bit unrealistic in some scenarios. As boss autos are in intervals of 3 seconds, and cast bars and actions from bosses usually interrupt their auto attacks, this means we would need 5 instances of auto attack or AoE damage within those 15 seconds to break the shields. One cool thing about Haima though is that you actually don't need to fully utilize the last shield right away, because the ability refreshes each shield duration on it once each breaks. This is also relevant for the healing aspect, meaning if you don't get all 5 uses off and the heal goes out, the last shield applied will stay intact for whatever damage comes out afterwards. Overall, this skill is very strong for sustaining tanks during a fight, and while you'll get most of the value of this ability in general use, just be careful not to waste wasted by using it when the boss is doing long strings of no damage due to it using mechanics. This is very popular in design. You can actually see it in past raid tiers like for the Lion mechanic, Basic Relativity, and Worm's Lament. Panhaima also suffers from the same issues that Haima does, however it is definitely more relevant as its main purpose is to mitigate AoE damage, which is less frequent than auto attack damage. Because of the way the shields work and interact, utilizing it for a hit of an AoE, applying another shield and then having the heal go off afterwards to top you for the next AoE while the last reapplied shield also helps mitigate it is really strong and is one of the many fun ways to theorize using this ability. I actually do this in the second extreme trial where I apply Panhaima for an AoE attack and then afterwards it heals up while the second set of shields also mitigate the AoE attack following. I personally love thinking of unique ways to use certain skills like that. Panhaima also doesn't suffer the downside of Liturgy where it only registers for damage 1 second apart of each other. This makes using it on spam AoE mechanics very strong as it will apply and register for each hit due to the instant reapplication of the shield and the change to the shield registration. The only thing I could really see Square Enix doing with this ability is turning the fall off from the healing to 200 potency, but honestly in its current state that would make it way too overpowered. Holos is a multifunctional tool that is very strong. It's a 300 potency heal with a 10% mitigation effect stacked on top of it. One of the biggest strengths of Holos is that its mitigation is applied instantly and it doesn't cascade, meaning it is not locked to its animation or heal and applies at the same time to each party member. You can see this when using the effect as it's applied before the animation starts. This makes it extremely reactive and easy to time. For the majority of the time you won't be using this ability for the heal, but hey, it's a nice little top up for the party if they are missing a bit of HP before the damage you're using this on. Holos also stacks with all other AoE mitigation sources in your kit, meaning you can apply it simultaneously with Kerachole or Taurochole. Now on to the big baddie, one of the strongest abilities in Sage's toolkit and the entire game in my opinion, good old Pneuma. Let's talk about how insane this ability is. It's a 600 potency heal that can be buffed with Zoe to a whopping 900 potency and also has a range of 25 yalms, making it the largest radius heal in the game. However, Pneuma has a secret buff to it that not many actually know about. When using Pneuma, it has these same interactions as the new shield and mitigation abilities where not only does it apply instantly when the cast is registered, it also doesn't cascade like every other healing ability in the game, meaning it applies on everyone at the same exact time. This makes it one of the strongest reactionary tools in the game for recovery and consistent burst healing. I really cannot overstate how powerful this tool is, and it might actually be one of the, if not strongest actions in the game because of this factor. I don't know how many times I've seen someone mistime a heal or just for someone in the party not to get the heal in time and die because of it. The only downside to Pneuma is that it has a cast time which can make it feel kind of clunky at times. Some part of me wants to say to make it an instant cast ability, but I can't imagine how strong it would become if it was. Just imagine having an instant cast simultaneously applying high potency heal. The last couple abilities I'm going to bring up are just mentioned last because they are mostly utility if anything, and I wanted to organize it with healing first. Pepsis can be pretty strong, however it is pretty unique. Because of the way Pepsis works as an action having a predetermined potency, this means as long as your shield of Eukrasion Diagnosis or Prognosis doesn't break, you can activate it and get the full potency. You can actually do some pretty insane tech with this ability by utilizing it on your Eukrasion Prognosis and activating it right after an AoE attack registers, and as long as it doesn't wipe your shields, you'll both mitigate the AoE and get the heal from Pepsis, basically turning Eukrasion Prognosis from a 420 potency heal to a 770 potency heal. This is also technically doable with your Eukrasion Diagnosis, but is slightly less relevant due to how little you'll cast this ability in raids. Zoe increases the healing magic potency of your next healing spell by 50%. In the Mediator version, this used to be doubled, and honestly, I'm kind of glad it got nerfed seeing as how their healing kit is already disgustingly strong. I can't imagine Sage being able to deploy as strong of shields as Scholar on top of it. Because Zoe is the only way for Sage to employ a strong barrier heal on the party, you will have to choose between boosting with Pneuma and Eukrasion Prognosis in raids and Eukrasion Diagnosis in dungeons. This also gives Sage a weakness of not being able to employ as strong of shields as Scholar, however it doesn't require any setup like Deployment Tactics does. The last ability I'm going to mention is Icarus, which is honestly another tool I definitely underrated. This ability has so many functions. You can use it for uptime in raids by either jumping to the boss from far away or having players pre-position for you, letting you gap close to them. You can use it in dungeons by using it on the tank if they are ahead of you, letting you keep up with them naturally, and you can even utilize it in more funky ways. When using Icarus with Rescue, you can actually perform a pseudo swap of sorts by switching places with the target it's used on if Icarus is used instantly after using Rescue. While this is extremely niche, maybe there will come a time where this might be useful. Another interesting use I found is that if you use Icarus while a teammate is using a gap closer, you'll follow them through the gap closer, effectively adding more range to Icarus. Again, this is pretty niche and mainly only useful in dungeons if anything. The only thing I do wish they would do is add a second charge to Icarus. Not only is Sage mobility extremely limited, which I'll get into next, but the ability itself is extremely fun to utilize is, and being only restricted to one use every 45 seconds is pretty lackluster and limiting in itself. If other jobs can have more than one charge movement abilities, some even having 3, looking at you monk, then the healer with the least mobility should also have more than one. With its healing toolkit out of the way, let's talk about some of the DPS options which tie into its mobility. Phlegma is very hit or miss for me. On one hand, the limited range of the ability can make the job interesting in some scenarios, causing you to think more about how you're going to use it as you're not always going to be able to be in melee range. On the other hand, it's very limiting and can screw the Sage for no reason at all, as it's your only consistent instant cast GCD and movement tool, and it's locked to being near melee range. For balancing reasons alone, I don't think this skill should be 6 yalms and should instead be the same range as your other spells. Phlegma, however, is one of the only DPS positive movement tools in the game, which could be why it's so restrictive. Toxicon 2 is another interesting ability as it's DPS neutral on single target and isn't restricted in any way, giving it a very specific advantage over other abilities used mainly for movement or weaving. Ruin 2 and Lily suffer from being a DPS loss to use, and abilities like Light Speed are restricted by cooldown or are forced to be used for specific burst windows so you don't lose damage. The only issue with Toxicon is that it has no way to be generated during combat without suffering a massive DPS loss, as you need Eukrasion diagnosis shields to break to generate it. This leaves us in a predicament of only being able to generate Toxicons pre-pull or during downtime. Most fights nowadays also have AoEs at the start of the encounters, so Sage shouldn't have an issue obtaining 3 Addersting right away. I've heard the ability to generate Toxicon stacks should be added to Rhizomata being flown around, and while I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea, you would have to have a downside to Toxicon as well, otherwise Sage's movement would just be way too strong. Coming up with ways to generate and utilize Toxicon in fights is also super satisfying and interesting, and I think players overall will find this style of play more fun and engaging. Sage damage mobility overall is very restrictive. You can use Phlegma, but it can only be used once every 45 seconds following the initial use of its 2 charges, and you only get the 3 guaranteed Toxicons at the start of the fight due to AoEs breaking shields. This gives Sage a disadvantage as they are only able to consistently use 2 instant cast GCDs plus 2 Icarus every 90 seconds, and Icarus has the further restriction of only being able to be used on players or enemies. However, Sage suffers no DPS loss at using these tools, whereas other healers do or are restricted by cooldown. I think this is fine and is honestly good design, as it rewards players for thinking ahead and pre-planning their movement, and I think that the players that have issues with it play around with it a little bit more, they will come to like it. While its damage mobility may be restrictive, its healing mobility is absolutely not. This is due to the fact that Sage has a multitude of off GCD instacast healing abilities, as well as the ability to heal and deploy shields while on the move with Eukrasion. This makes Sage one of the best healers when handling damage during movement. This strength is mainly going to shine in Ultimate, but there may be a mechanic here or there in Savage as well that will make you go, damn, I wish I had a Sage. While this video is getting a little too long now, I think I've talked about most everything I wanted to talk about, so I'll wrap it up with a brief overview of how I feel about Sage. Sage is a very strong barrier healer. It's able to deploy shields fast and while on the move. It's one of the only healers that doesn't lose damage when using its mobility tools, however is more limited frequency wise. It's able to employ a variety of healing through its Addersgall System or actions like Pneuma, Panhaima, and Haima, giving it a much stronger pure healing side than Scholar. It has multiple tools for different situations, having multiple single target and AoE mitigation tools in its toolkit. It also has one of the strongest free healing toolkits next to Astrologian. It's not able to mitigate as strongly as Scholar can, and also has one less mitigation tool at their disposal. Eukrasion Prognosis has less healing potency than Sucker, with the shield being the same potency, although Sage is able to spam Prognosis, which is a 300 potency heal. It suffers heavily post-death, its whole toolkit suffering the effects of weakness and brink of death, while having its Addersgall tied to its MP regeneration, meaning they will have to choose between healing or recovering their MP. Sage is an extremely rewarding and fun job, and shield healers are feasting right now being able to choose between it and Scholar. In the next video, we'll be going over my thoughts on the White Mage. I'll see you there.